this is the challenge, is doing this now because, oh gosh, what was it? The Coddling of the American Mind, and Jonathan Rauch's book, The Constitution of Knowledge, both pointed out to a particular problem with the so-called safetyism culture. So, unless you've been living under a rock, I guess, you'd probably be aware at this point that the Trump administration is doing a lot of things with higher education right now. We're around the freezing of funding and the retraction of grants and all of that kind of things. I have this here from the AP just to make the point for those folks who might need a brief recap in all of this. And it certainly is interesting to watch what's been going on here. So let's see. Harvard, from the AP here. Harvard University is the latest in a growing list of higher education institutions that had its federal funding targeted by the government in order to comply with the Trump administration's political agenda. The series of threats and subsequent pauses in funding to some top universities have become an unprecedented tool for the administration to exert influence on college campuses. 6 of the 7 universities impacted are Ivy League schools. In which you can see that list here, Harvard being easily the biggest one of the bunch, Cornell, Northwestern, Brown, Columbia, Princeton, and the University of Pennsylvania. Now, I imagine there's a lot of different responses and reactions to this. And the next question, of course, with all this is really how should the universities respond to this? Because obviously it's the elite ones that we're talking about, but of course there's other things that happen as a result of these highly publicized kinds of events. And so I want to bring us over and actually leap off from here, because with as crazy enough in the noise that there is, it's easy to lose track of certain things. And I wanted to go to this article in particular. This is an opinion piece in The Hill, how universities should respond to Trump's assault on academic freedom. And the reason I wanted to highlight this one in particular is because it's written together by 2 people who embody what it is, really, I think, having watched them and televised in public events and what have you, interact with each other and interact with an audience. They embody a lot of what it is to be fundamentally different from each other in a whole host of things, and yet to be the best of friends. This is written by Robert George and Cornel West. Now, those of you familiar in politics probably know Cornel West from there because he did run for president. But also, he's much more left of center than I am. And hey, that's great. As well as Robert George. Now, Robert George is much more conservative. He runs the Madison Institute, actually, I think at Princeton. Runs the Madison Center at Princeton. So, of course, he does have something of a direct connection to this. But I highlight this together because they jointly write this when they come from very, very, very different points of view on a lot of issues, and yet they remain the best of friends, which is fabulous and a model for a lot of our interactions and how they should be when we're talking about some complex issues. And so they wrote this, and I think this is a great piece to highlight some of the important things that do need to happen. So let us continue here. Or let us begin, I should say. Facing federal funding suspensions and investigations, elite universities have arrived at a moment of crisis. Many have, rightly in our opinion, pledged to never compromise on core principles of academic freedom and vowed to resist the federal government's heavy-handed tactics. Most have refused, however, to fully acknowledge how their own delinquencies have precipitated their current predicament. Their failure to maintain viewpoint diversity in any meaningful sense among faculty and students, failure to dismantle entrenched campus cultures of self-censorship and intellectual conformism, failure to sustain robust climates of intellectual freedom, and failure to act against anti-Semitic and other forms of harassment. These failings most undermine the most basic mission of universities, namely the pursuit of the truth. Now, this is exactly if you had to sum up the whole thing in one paragraph, that's it. Right there. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, right? Um, here's the thing on this. Indeed, they are right. A lot of these universities are right to say, no, we're not gonna give in to the federal government demanding things in this certain way. Like, I think there was, if I remember correctly, there were certain things, and folks can tell me in the comments, there were certain things they were asking Harvard to do with the curriculum and the curriculum in certain departments and all this other kind of stuff. I'm sorry, you don't get a say over curriculum. You really don't. Um, you can get a say in other things. There's been some great talks in the heterodox academy space and amongst others lately talking about when you cross the line to the point where you do need some enforcement to push back on a professor that is perhaps trying to get their students to behave in a particular way when that's not their job, versus a professor that's practicing their academic freedom, speaking on different issues related, and promoting scholarship amongst their students, albeit in anything interesting. But it is also true, as they point out here, I've talked about it many times, that there are very legitimate criticisms of universities in the past few years in particular that have arisen. And if you recall from the Academic Freedom Index, a lot of the US ranking of the Academic Freedom Index started to drop off in 2019. And so there's a whole lot of reasons for that, but there's a lot of reasons for that, but it is very much there's very much a concern there about these kinds of things that they're talking about. So here's the here's the rub on that. What do? You are right to. I very much agree with the sentiment, believe it or not, as much as I razz on different universities. I very much agree with the sentiment of pushing back and maintaining academic freedom and maintaining an independence from the federal government in terms of viewpoints and what have you. That is what a university should do. A university should be a place where you can pursue the truth. But in that vein, there's also a need to maintain and promote viewpoint diversity and constructive disagreement, amongst other things, and to deal with issues of harassment when they arise on campus. That is also correct. To get at that most basic fundamental mission, you got to be able to do both. You got to be able to push back on the external influence. Otherwise, you end up with things like China, where the Chinese Communist Party controls things, or what it was like in the USSR, or any number of different things. And so that has to happen. Both of these things have to happen here. Private universities, despite receiving substantial government funding, are right to protect their autonomy against government overreach. Although the terms of federal grants must be strictly respected, this is what most folks don't realize. There's a reason, pause here, there's a reason when you get a grant that a lot of universities have whole departments just related to setting up the award and helping a professor write a proposal and things like that. Is there a certain contract language that goes into all that when you set up the award at an institution? Anyway, and compliance with duly enacted laws and regulations are well-established conditions for eligibility for tax-exempt status and government financial support. It is improper for government to punish universities, for example, suspending scientific research grants for honoring the free speech and academic freedom rights of their faculty members and students. This is by no means to say that the government may not investigate compliance failures or misconduct in or by universities, but government itself must, as a matter of law, comply with federal regulations in conducting investigations and deciding whether a grant should be suspended. Legally stipulated procedural guarantees must be honored, and universities have the right to defend themselves against allegations of noncompliance with grant conditions or violations of law. Those are some of the obligations of the government. Now, let me pause there. This is again true. This is where I find the grant suspensions and the clawbacks of money to be strange, because there are certain legal agreements that are there, and I don't think. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it's all going to unfold. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of precedent for that I can find legally, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But this goes to an interesting, deeper question that Robert and Cornell here don't get into, which is, what is the proper role and connection between universities and the government? And we can think about this in all sorts of different ways. How much should a government be giving money to its universities? What kind of role should the government have with respect to tuition, to all those other kinds of things? You think of any number of different aspects of university. What kind of role and connection should a government have? Now, obviously, nowhere near what is this current state with like the CCP in China, where they basically control everything with respect to their universities, or what was with the USSR, or is in other countries. Um, but there's some kind of a relationship there that has to be defined, and I don't know that we've actually collectively as a society really thought about it in the last few years. So that's kind of why I paused there for a second. Is there this is true, but it's hinting at another bigger, deeper question. I would love to hear Robert and Cornell actually respond to this. Like, what is the proper relationship here? I think the two of them might actually have completely different opinions. Part of me wants to know. What is the actual proper relationship between the government and academia? Between the government and what your opinion on it anyway. That would be what I would be very curious about. So anyway, that's just leaping off point to say some more general, larger questions I have. Now, what about the obligations of universities? In their rush to defend themselves, elite universities have sometimes failed to acknowledge their own duties and their shortcomings in living up to them. Like I said, there are some very fair criticisms, not just for Harvard and Columbia and all the rest of the elite universities, but just higher education in general. There are some distinct criticisms that are very well founded. Rather than ignore or deny well founded criticisms of their institutions, academic leaders should view the current moment as an opportunity for an authentic institutional examination of conscience. Universities, let's be honest, have lost the trust of the American people. And that is the university's fault, not the fault of the people. University units, and in some cases entire institutions, have been politicized and ideologically partisan. Viewpoint diversity, particularly among faculty members, but in some institutions among students too, has essentially collapsed. A 2023 survey revealed that nearly 80% of Harvard faculty identify themselves as liberal, or very liberal, while less than 3% identify as conservative. All while prominent leaders at Harvard have called for more content-based restrictions on faculty members' freedom of expression rights. Now, I want to pause and actually make a note here. According to the FIRE surveys on college free expression, Harvard has consistently rated at the bottom or near the bottom with respect to campus free expression. So, one of the worst in the country, if not the worst, consistently. More broadly, classrooms are too often centers of indoctrination, not forums for learning by the examination of the best evidence and arguments on competing sides of contested questions. To authentically reclaim their missions, universities must do more than stand up to hardball tactics from Washington. They should do that. Don't get me wrong. I very much agree. Do that. But you got to do more than that, too. They must take steps that will enhance the quality of education they offer, work to restore public trust in their purpose and the goods that they offer, and de-escalate the circumstances that sparked the present feud with the federal government. To begin, universities must make the maintenance of viewpoint diversity and the robust clash of ideas and arguments on campus a top priority. The way to do this is not through affirmative action or preferences of any kind to conservatives, as some propose, which I disagree with that idea myself. I don't think this is a good idea at all. With respect to, the viewpoint diversity problem in particular, as we're talking about as a solution to this, no, definitely not. Viewpoint diversity can be increased simply by ending discrimination in hiring and promotion against scholars who dissent from ideas that have hardened into orthodoxies on so many campuses. This means, among other things, getting rid of such practices as mandatory statements on job or promotion applications, which screen out dissenters by implicitly demanding a pledge of ideological fealty as a condition of employment or advancement. In addition, elite universities in particular need to admit their past hypocrisy and failures on free speech matters, as the presidents of Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology tragically failed to do in a widely publicized December 2023 congressional hearing, and adopt strictly enforced free speech and institutional neutrality policies to ensure that non-sectarian universities function as impartial forums with a robust examination of ideas and not as partisan participants in political debates. So I talked about this back at the time, actually, on this channel, and in other places, I think, but um, yeah, in other places. Um, but here's the rub. The three presidents, in principle, when they were at that hearing, correctly articulated the principles of free speech. And what Cornell and Robert point out here is also true. They failed, very, very badly failed, to recognize the hypocrisy of their own institutions with respect to that, particularly Harvard. Whew, particularly Harvard. But now here we are. But that was really a turning point with respect to the university side of things, because people saw it, and folks who were paying attention also saw the hypocrisy that was there. And then it goes from there because it was very public. This can and must be done while honoring the right of peaceful protest and protecting all members of the academic community from discrimination, harassment, intimidation, vandalism, and violence. Universities should not be or offer to their students safe spaces. Universities should be Socratic spaces in which students, I like that phrase actually, that was something good. Socratic spaces in which students, irrespective of background and viewpoint, are challenged rather than insulated from hearing perspectives or arguments they may find unsettling. This is the challenge, is doing this now, because, oh gosh, what was it? The Coddling of the American Mind, and Jonathan Rauch's book, The Constitution of Knowledge, both pointed out to a particular problem with the so-called safetyism culture. Where your feelings have to be protected all the time, and all that other kinds of things. That's going to be hard to bring back now, and these kinds of things. So we'll see how it goes from there, right? Universities should resist threats to academic freedom, whether they come from outside or inside their walls. They should guard their autonomy, but they must at the same time acknowledge and move to correct the faults and failings that made them vulnerable to the government institution intrusions that we are now witnessing, and which left them without something they crucially need in the face of the government's assault: public support. For those of us in universities, and especially for our leaders, it is true that this is a time for resolve, but it is also a time for humility. Both are required if we are to be faithful to our scholarly and pedagogical missions. We must protect our institutions, to be sure, but we must also reform them. Brilliant piece. And again, like I said, Cornel West and Robert George are complete opposites of each other on the ideological spectrum. And yet this is actually something they agree on. And they are, it's amazing to watch them when they're in talks together and side by side, because the banter is hysterically funny between them, but they're very much, they're also very, very much friends, genuinely friends. You can see it. It's amazing to watch, and it's something that I bet you they have some really great discussions together, and then they can go have a beer together. It's totally fine. Go have a beer, go have dinner, any number of different things. Totally fine. That's the kind of thing that needs to be back. Seriously, needs to be uplifted and what have you. So that's one of the reasons I posted this one. But it's also the point here to make is that, yes, there's a lot of crap going on in the universities right now. It's one of the reasons I haven't talked about it too much, is because there's just way too much going on. I can't synthesize it all fast enough myself. But here's the point to make on this, that is the thing. Yes, universities are right to push back on a whole lot of the nonsense that is coming down. And at the same time, they do need to look and do some introspection. They need to do some introspection, some internal evaluations. Think about some of these things that have now caused some problems. Because I don't agree entirely with the assessment here, because I think, what did they say? Oh gosh, where was it? Yeah, yeah, they said here, failings under, where is it? Oh gosh, there's something about fault. No, here it is. University, and that is the university's fault, not the fault of the people. this is painting it as it's entirely the university's fault, or at least that's the way I read it. So questions of interpretation there, but I don't agree that it's entirely the university's fault. I believe it's the university's fault in part, because there are some grave errors that have been made. But anyway, um, this is a great point to make in that I do think the universities that are pushing back are right to do that. But they need to couple that with actually doing some internal examination. That's it. Tell me what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.